There are laws written not in stone or scripture, but in the silent, invisible architecture of the cosmos. They are the ancient axioms of existence, truths so fundamental that they are mistaken for the natural course of things. We see the sun rise and set, the seasons change, empires rise and fall, and we call it time. We see life bloom and wither, and we call it nature. But beneath all of this, there is a current, a silent gravitational pull that determines the final destination of all things. It is a power not of creation, but of conclusion, a forgotten God whose domain is the final, inevitable sentence at the end of every story. This is the story of that law, of that current, of that God. This is the story of Moros, the incarnation of a fate from which no one can escape. In the time before time, there was only the formless, the boundless potential of what could be. The Greeks called it chaos, the chasm, a silent, gaping abyss where the seeds of reality lay dormant. From this pregnant void, the first consciousness stirred. Not a god of light or creation, but a presence of deep and total darkness. Nyx, night, unfurled her wings, and the universe took its first breath in shadow. She was not merely the absence of light. She was a being, a will, a power so immense that even Zeus, in his future glory, would learn to fear her. From the same void came her brother and consort, Erebus, the embodiment of darkness. His mists were the veil between worlds, the deep, impenetrable blackness that filled the hollows of the newborn cosmos. Together, they were the primordial parents, the source from which the conditions of existence itself would spring. Their union was not of love, as mortals know it, but of fundamental cosmic necessity, and from their spectral embrace was born a lineage of powerful, abstract, and terrifying beings, each a living incarnation of a fundamental truth of existence. These were not gods to be worshipped with wine and song. They were the very fabric of the cosmic condition, the rules of the game that had not yet begun. First came Aether, the bright, pure air of the heavens, and Hemera, day. But the children of night were many, and not all so luminous. From the solitary, abyssal consciousness of Nyx emerged a host of spirits, each a personification of the immutable laws that would govern every life to come. She gave birth to Hypnos, the gentle god of sleep, who would offer respite from the labors of the waking world. His touch, a light shadow that soothes the mind, and the Moirai, the thousand spirits of dreams, who would carry mortals and gods alike into realms of fantasy and terror. She gave birth to Icarus, the cruel spirit of old age, who withers strength and steals beauty, a constant reminder of the body's decay. And Oedipus, the goddess of misery and suffering, her heart heavy with the infinite pain of the world. She gave birth to Nemesis, the relentless agent of retribution, whose gaze ensures that no hubris goes unpunished, no cosmic balance remains disturbed for long. And she bore Eris, the goddess of discord, her heart alive with the thrill of dissent, the spark that would ignite the most devastating wars. And among this dark and mighty brood, two brothers were born to stand watch over the final moments of existence. The first was Thanatos, death itself. He was no monster, but a solemn, winged figure, his touch as gentle as that of his brother Hypnos. He was the final release, the quiet end of a long journey, a merciful shepherd who guided souls into the underworld. Beside him stood the Keres, spirits of violent death, who reveled in the carnage of the battlefield, their claws stained with the blood of heroes and kings. They were the storm, the plague, the sudden and brutal end. But before all of them, born from Nyx's deepest contemplation of the void, came another, a being more abstract, more inescapable, and more terrifying than any of his siblings. He was not the end itself, but the path toward it. Not the last breath, but the inexorable journey that leads to that breath. He was Moros, fate, the last thought in the mind of night, the last and most perfect of her dark children. Moros was not granted a grand entrance in myth. He has no temples, no epic tales solely devoted to him. He is a presence felt, not seen, a name whispered in the darkest hours of prophecy. For his power did not lie in action, but in being. He was the personification of the most fundamental law of the universe, that everything which begins must end. He is the invisible force that drives a hero toward his tragic flaw. He is the silent current that guides a civilization toward its prophesied decline. He is the psychological weight of a future that has already been written. While Thanatos waits at the destination, Moros is the journey itself. He is the cold awareness in a king's heart that his kingdom will one day be dust. He is the quiet despair of a god who knows that even his immortality has an end. That a day will come when his name is no longer spoken, his altars no longer tended. He carries no sword, he has no need of one. His weapon is the certainty of the end, a truth so powerful that it shapes the choices of every living being, whether they are aware of it or not. He is the reason a mortal man builds a legacy, hoping to outlast his fleeting existence. He is the reason a god demands worship, fearing the silence of oblivion. He is the anguish in a lover's heart, who holds their beloved close, knowing that time is a thief. Moros is the engine of destiny, the spiritual gravity that ensures that no one, not even the gods, can escape the path laid out for them. In the cosmic order, Moros was not alone. He was intrinsically bound to the most powerful and feared divine beings of all, the Moirai, the Fates. These three sisters, ancient and unyielding, were the weavers of destiny itself. Whether they were daughters of Nyx, like Moros, or daughters of Zeus and the Titaness Themis, their authority was absolute. There was Clotho, the spinner, her hands forever busy turning the spindle from which emerged the thread of each life. At the moment of birth, she began to spin, her movements setting the story of a new existence into motion. Beside her sat Lachesis, the allotter. With her measuring rod, she determined the length and quality of each thread, assigning the joys, sorrows, triumphs, and failures that would define a life. And finally there was Atropos, she who cannot be turned, the most feared of the three. Her eyes were fixed on the tapestry, and in her hand she held a pair of glittering shears. When the thread reached its measured length, she made a single, decisive cut, and the life ended. Together, the Moirai represented the architecture of fate. They were the grand designers, the cosmic legislators, who decreed what must be. But their decrees were only a blueprint, a law written in the stars. It was Moros who enforced that law. He was the executive power of destiny. If the fates declared that a king would fall by his own arrogance, it was Moros who whispered in the king's ear, nurturing the seeds of pride until they blossomed into self-destructive hubris. If the fates wove a thread of tragedy for a great hero, it was Moros who guided the hero's steps, ensuring that every choice, every action, brought him closer to the heart of his sorrow. The Moirai wrote the prophecy. Moros ensured its fulfillment. They were the architects of the labyrinth. He was the invisible minotaur at its center, not a monster to be slain, but a destination to be met. He was the current, and the thread of life was the boat, carried by his relentless flow toward the sharp, final cut of Atropos's shears. From their gleaming thrones on Mount Olympus, the gods ruled the world. They were immortal, powerful, and drunk on their own glory. They believed themselves the masters of creation, their wills shaping the lives of the mortals who toiled below. But not even they were immune to the ancient laws that governed the cosmos. They, too, could feel the cold gaze of Moros. Zeus, king of the gods, could hurl thunderbolts and shake the foundations of the earth. He could challenge the authority of his fellow Olympians and demand obedience from all. But even he could not defy the decrees of the fates. In epic tales, it was said that Zeus held a golden scale, weighing the destinies of heroes in battle. But this was a performance, a ritual to assert his role as arbiter of justice. The outcome was already known. The threads had already been measured, and the shadow of Moros loomed over every conflict, a silent observer ensuring that the predestined end came to pass. Even the gods had their own Moros, their own fate. Not a death of the body, for they were immortal, but a fate of their era, a fate of their power. They knew that their reign, like that of the Titans before them, was not eternal. A day would come when their temples crumbled, their names became whispers in a forgotten tongue, and their power faded into memory. This knowledge was their private terror, the spectre haunting their golden halls. It was the awareness that they, too, were just characters in a story, and every story has an end. This fear was rooted in the very nature of Moros's birth. He was a son of Nyx, the primordial night, a being so ancient and powerful that even Zeus did not dare to oppose her. In one of the great myths, Hera, queen of the gods, convinced Hypnos, the god of sleep, to lull Zeus into a deep slumber so she could torment her mortal son, Heracles. When Zeus awoke, his fury knew no bounds. He hunted Hypnos across the skies, intending to cast him into the eternal abyss of Tartarus. But Hypnos fled to his mother's side, seeking refuge in Nyx's dark embrace. And there, Zeus stopped. He, the king of all gods, halted his pursuit, his rage stilled by a deeper, more primordial fear. He would not risk angering ancient night. In that single moment of hesitation, the hierarchy of the cosmos was revealed. The Olympians, for all their splendor, were only a recent chapter in the universe's story. The true, untouchable powers were those born from the original void, and Moros, her son, her silent, watchful son, was one of them. His power was his inheritance, a birthright of shadow and silence that the noisy gods of Olympus could never fully comprehend. For eons, humanity lived under the full, crushing weight of Moros's gaze. They were born with the curse of foresight, the terrible knowledge of their own appointed end. A man looked at his hands and saw the day when they would grow cold and still. A woman looked at her child and saw the moment of their final parting. Life was not a journey of discovery, but a march toward death. Every dawn was a reminder of one less day. Every joy was stained by the certainty of its conclusion. Humanity was paralyzed, trapped in a state of perpetual despair, unable to build, to create, to love, because what was the point when the end was always in sight? It was a state of perfect and orderly misery. The cosmos functioned as designed. Moros's law was absolute. But one being looked down upon this suffering and saw not order, but cruelty. He was a titan, a remnant of the old regime, a being whose heart burned with a fire the Olympians could not comprehend. His name was Prometheus. He had already defied the gods by stealing fire from Olympus and giving it to humanity, a gift of warmth, technology, civilization. For this, Zeus had condemned him to an eternity of torment, chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle would devour his liver each day, only for it to grow back each night. But Prometheus's greatest act of rebellion was not the theft of fire. It was a far subtler and deeper defiance. As the chorus asks him in Aeschylus's great tragedy, what remedy did he find for mankind's suffering? And Prometheus, his voice hoarse with the memory of his rebellion, reveals his secret. "I caused mortals to cease foreseeing their doom," he declares. "I made blind hopes dwell within their breasts." In that single cosmic act, Prometheus rewired the mortal soul. He did not eliminate Moros. He could not. The end was still certain, the path still laid out, but he wrapped it in a veil. He took away the terrible clarity of foresight and replaced it with something new, something that had never truly existed in the world before. Hope, blind hope. The irrational, defiant, wondrous belief that tomorrow might be better than today. The ability to love knowing that loss is inevitable. The courage to build knowing that all things crumble to dust. The will to live, fully and fiercely, in the face of certain death. This was the true fire Prometheus gave humanity. Not the flame that warms the hearth, but the flame that burns in the heart. It was a shield against the paralyzing gaze of Moros. It was an act of cosmic sabotage against the primordial order. It allowed humanity to forget its fate, to live in the precious and fleeting moments of the present, to dream of a future not defined solely by its end. He gave them the gift of story, not just conclusion. He allowed them to fall in love with the journey, even though the destination remained unchanged. And in doing so, he made Moros a forgotten god, no longer a constant, conscious presence in the minds of men, but a distant and shadowy figure, a whisper at the edge of thought. Humanity chose hope. They chose to live as if the thread had no end. And because of this, they were able to create civilizations, write poetry, fall in love, build legacies that echoed through the centuries. They learned to dance in their chains. Yet, even with the shield of hope, Moros's hand never truly left. His presence can be felt, a dark current in all the great tragedies of Greek myth. He is the unseen actor, the silent director, ensuring that the destined end arrives, no matter how fiercely the characters struggle against it. Look to the wind-swept plains of Troy, where the greatest heroes of Greece and Anatolia clashed in a decade of blood and fire. The war was sparked by the abduction of a queen, a matter of pride and passion, but beneath the surface, a deeper, older design was at work. The ruin of Troy had been prophesied long before. It was a city doomed to fall. And so Moros was there. He was in Agamemnon's pride, in Achilles' rage, in Hector's tragic nobility. He guided every spear, every arrow, every foolish decision that brought both sides closer to mutual ruin. The heroes fought for glory, for honor, for love. But they were all, in the end, mere instruments of a preordained destruction. Moros was the true victor at Troy, for his aim was not to choose a side, but to ensure that the great city burned, as it had always been destined to do. He was the satisfaction in the heart of the fire, the silence in the city's ruins, or witnessed the flight of Icarus, a tale not of a god or a king, but of a boy's simple, ecstatic dream. Imprisoned in a labyrinth, he was given wings by his father, Daedalus, a master craftsman. The warning was clear: do not fly too low, or the sea spray will soak your wings. Do not fly too high, or the sun's heat will melt the wax. It was a path of moderation, a careful balance between ambition and humility. But as Icarus soared into the vast open sky, he was overwhelmed by the euphoria of freedom. He felt like a god, and in that moment of pure, unguarded joy, he forgot the warning. He forgot his mortal limits. He flew higher and higher, chasing the sun. This was not merely youthful recklessness. It was the pull of Moros. It was the fate that lives in every ambition, the tragic flaw at the heart of every dream. Moros was the seductive warmth of the sun on Icarus's face, the exhilarating sensation of ascent, the whisper telling him he could touch the heavens. And as the wax melted, as the feathers scattered, as he plunged from the sky into the sea, it was not a punishment from the gods. It was the inevitable consequence of his own nature, a destiny written into the very fabric of his being. His fate was not the fall. His fate was the flight itself, the wondrous, tragic, and ultimately fatal desire to be more than he was. And then there is the story of Orpheus, the musician whose songs could enchant stones and tame the fiercest beasts. When his beloved wife, Eurydice, was taken by the bite of a viper and descended into the underworld, Orpheus's grief was so deep it moved even the gods. Armed with nothing but his lyre and his sorrow, he journeyed into Hades' realm, a place from which no mortal had ever returned. His music, steeped in the pain of his loss, was so beautiful it stilled the underworld. The tormented souls paused in their labors to listen. The Erinyes, the dread Furies, wept. Even Hades, grim lord of the dead, and his queen, Persephone, were moved. They granted him a favor never before given. He could lead Eurydice back to the world of the living. But there was a condition. He had to walk in front of her and not look back, not even once, until they were both fully in the sunlight. It was a test of faith, of trust. But it was more than that. It was a stage arranged by Moros. As Orpheus began the long, arduous ascent, the silence behind him was torment. Was she there? Was she following? Doubt, fear, the desperate need for a single glance of reassurance began to gnaw at his soul. This was not just his anxiety, it was the tug of fate, the subtle, insidious whisper of Moros, turning his love into a weapon against him. He was so close to the light. The warmth of the sun was on his face, but the silence stretched on. The doubt grew into unbearable agony, and in that last moment, just as he stepped into the sun, he turned. He had to see her, and he did for one brief, searing instant. He saw her face, her form, his love, and then she was gone, pulled back forever into darkness, a silent scream on her lips. His fate was not the condition imposed by Hades. His fate was the love that made obedience impossible. Moros had used the purest thing in his heart to ensure that his tragedy was complete. The backward glance was not a choice, it was an inevitability, a destiny carried out by the very nature of his being. Consider the tragic story of Oedipus, king of Thebes. At his birth, a prophecy was made. He would kill his father and marry his mother. To escape this fate, he was abandoned as an infant, raised in a foreign land, and spent his life desperately trying to outrun the shadow that pursued him. He was clever, resourceful, determined to forge his own path, but every step he took to avoid his destiny was a step that led him directly into it. His journey was not simply a chain of unfortunate coincidences. It was the work of Moros. The god of fate was the inner, psychological force driving him. He was the arrogance that led Oedipus to kill a stranger at a crossroads, a stranger who was his father. He was the pride that pushed him to solve the riddle of the Sphinx and become king of Thebes, marrying the widowed queen, his mother. Oedipus believed he was fighting an external prophecy, a curse laid upon him by the gods. But the real struggle was within himself. Moros was the very nature of his being, the tragic flaw woven into the thread of his life, compelling him to fulfill the prophecy not in spite of his choices, but because of them. When at last he learned the truth and blinded himself in horror, he was not merely reacting to his deeds, he was acknowledging the inescapable power that had guided him all along. He was finally seeing the face of his own fate. Even the mighty Titans, the first rulers of the cosmos, were not immune. Cronus, their king, had been warned that he would be overthrown by his own children, just as he had overthrown his father, Uranus. To defy this destiny, he swallowed each of his newborn children. It was an act of supreme, paranoid power. But it was useless. The downfall of the Titans was already written. It was their Moros. His wife, Rhea, hid their youngest son, Zeus, and tricked Cronus into swallowing a stone instead. And in that single act of deception, the engine of fate roared to life. Zeus grew to manhood, freed his siblings from his father's belly, and led a 10-year war that ended with the Titans' defeat and their imprisonment in the eternal darkness of Tartarus. Cronus had tried to devour his destiny, but in the end, his destiny devoured him. Moros ensured that a cosmic era ended, making way for the next. It was not punishment, it was necessity. The universe required change, and the time of the Titans was over. And so we are left with this forgotten god, this silent presence, Moros. He is the ghost in the machine of existence, the final truth we, the children of Prometheus, spend our lives trying to ignore. We fill our days with noise, ambition, love, distraction, anything to drown out the single, faint whisper that has been there from the beginning. The whisper that tells us all of this will end. But perhaps we have misunderstood him. Perhaps Moros is not a curse. Perhaps he is not a malevolent force to be feared. Perhaps he is the ultimate source of meaning. For what is a story without an ending? What is a life without the precious, finite boundary of time? It is the certainty of conclusion that gives the journey its urgency, its beauty, its intensity. It is the knowledge of the coming silence that makes the music so sweet. Moros is not the enemy of life. He is its silent partner. He is the frame that gives shape to the painting. He is the darkness that allows the stars to shine. He is the god of endings, and in that role, he is the god who gives all things their purpose. He stands at the end of every path, not with a sword, but with a quiet, understanding gaze. He is the fate that awaits us all, from the humblest mortal to the highest god, from the brightest star to the darkest thought. The final power, inescapable, and, perhaps in the end, the most merciful of all primordial forces. He is the closing of the book, the final chord, the deep, dreamless sleep at the end of a long and weary day. He is Moros, and his story is the end of all stories, the final silence, perfect and eternal. But before we conclude, we must grasp an even deeper truth. Moros is not just a force that acts upon us from without. He is a force that acts within us. Every time a man chooses to build something, knowing that one day it will be destroyed, it is Moros who moves him. Every time a lover embraces their partner, knowing that death will part them, it is Moros who whispers in their heart. Every time an artist creates a work, knowing it will be forgotten, it is Moros who gives them the courage to do it anyway. For it is in this awareness, in this acceptance of the inevitable end, that we discover the true meaning of life. It is not in living forever. It is not in fleeing death. It is in living fully, deeply, intensely, knowing that time is limited. It is in finding beauty in fragility, meaning in mortality, love in the fact that everything is ephemeral. The ancient Greeks understood this. That is why their myths do not end in triumph, but in tragedy. That is why their heroes do not live forever, but die gloriously. That is why their gods, however immortal, live in terror of the day their power will fade. Because they knew that true strength does not lie in resisting fate, but in embracing it. Moros, the forgotten god, is in truth the wisest of all. For while the other gods struggle for power, for control, for immortality, Moros remains still, knowing that all their efforts are in vain. All their thrones will crumble, all their names will be forgotten, all their realms will turn to dust. And in this knowledge, there is a strange peace. Perhaps that is why the Greeks forgot him, because Moros' message is too hard to accept. It is easier to believe that we can live forever, that we can escape death, that we can build something that will last for eternity. It is easier to live in denial than in truth. But those who have the courage to look into the eyes of Moros, to accept his message, to live consciously under his shadow, will discover something wondrous. They will discover that life, with all its brevity and fragility, is infinitely precious, that every moment is a gift, that every breath is a blessing, that every day is an opportunity to live more fully, more mindfully, more lovingly. This is the true gift of Moros. It is not a curse, but a teaching. Not the end of hope, but the foundation on which to build a truer, deeper, more conscious hope. Because when we accept that everything will end, we can finally begin to live. And so, the forgotten god remains in the margins of Greek mythology, a name whispered by sages and poets, a truth recognized by those who dare to see it. Moros, the god who foretells the end of everything, the god who, paradoxically, teaches us all how to live. For in the end, when the great tapestry of history has been fully woven, when the last thread has been cut by Atropos' shears, when final silence has descended upon all things, only one thing will remain: the memory of how we chose to live, the memory of the moments we shared, the loves we nurtured, the beauties we created, the truths we pursued. And in that memory, in that echo that lingers in the eternal silence, we will find the immortality the gods sought in vain. Moros does not steal life from us. He teaches us how to live it. And in this teaching, in this acceptance of our own mortality, we finally discover true freedom. The freedom to live without fear, the freedom to love without holding back, the freedom to create without doubt, the freedom to be fully human. This is the message of Moros, the forgotten god. This is his gift to humanity. And this is why, despite centuries of oblivion, his name continues to whisper through the ages, always reminding us of the deepest and most important truth of all, that life, in its brevity and fragility, is infinitely, eternally, wonderfully precious.